Hi, Elizabeth here. I have a cloud painting tutorial for you here. Watching this video will really help to understand all the nuances and subtleties involved in painting clouds. They can be really fun to paint, so enjoy. Now I'm starting this painting on a piece of canvas that I actually already painted on. It was a painting that didn't work out, so I scraped it out and now I'm reusing it, which is why you can see a remnant of a painting behind here on the canvas. Now to start off my cloud painting, I first mix up a bluish grayish color that will form the shadow area of the cloud. I prefer to first mix up a darker color than the white part of the cloud because I can just deal with more contrast when I have more of a darker blue color than a lighter white. Now because this blue color I mixed up just wasn't quite right, it was a little bit too gray and a little bit too purplish, I decided to scrape it out with my palette knife. And I work on just mixing up a slightly lighter and also brighter blue color. If a color isn't working well, it's much better to just get rid of it right in the beginning and then to remix a different color. You'll be happy that you did that. Now since this color is looking much better to me now, I'm continue to use it and I'm applying it to the area that I need this blue-gray color to be. Now I'm painting this while I'm actually looking at clouds in real life. So as I'm painting this, I'm looking at the sky just in front of me, and of course the clouds are changing constantly and they're moving past and just changing form. So what I'm doing is I'm not necessarily looking at one particular cloud in the sky, but I'm just looking at different clouds and taking different aspects of different clouds and putting that into this one painting. So don't think that you need to just observe one cloud and paint it exactly like it is, because it won't really be possible to do that because it's going to change form and it's going to move. So I really recommend and suggest to look at lots of different clouds and just take what you like about all of those and put that into your painting. I'm actually making this blue color here slightly darker than what I had it before. So I'm just making it a little more muted and a very subtle change in the value. You can see here that it's actually slightly less blue than it was before, and the way I did that is on my palette I mixed in a little bit of more orange color into my color. Since orange is the complementary color of blue, it automatically makes, if you mix some orange into blue, it automatically makes it less blue. And that's what muting means, and that's what happens when you mix complementary colors with each other. It makes it less of a color than it is. Since the color was still a little bit too blue, I actually scraped out more of that bluish gray color, and I applied my kind of newly mixed color onto that area. So the color that I have a little bit more orange mixed into, so it's slightly less blue. Now after all of that color mixing for the shadow area of the cloud, I now finally am moving on to the actual blue part of the sky, so that is right next to the cloud. Now to get this color, I simply mix some ultramarine blue with white. But since when you mix ultramarine blue with white and just leave it that color, the color is much too bright. So I mixed in a very small amount of orange as well to just mute it very slightly. But again, just a small amount of orange. Just like when I was painting that shadow part of the cloud, I'm dealing with different shades and colors for this blue part of the sky. It's really important to experiment and mix up different colors and make sure that you're getting the correct color, the color that works the best with what you're painting. So in my case, the blue part of the sky was a little bit too light earlier, so I made it darker by mixing in more ultramarine blue and then mixing in just, again, a very small amount of orange. However, since it was a bit too dark now, I scraped it out again and mixed in a little bit more white into the blue color. As mentioned before, it's perfectly normal to try out different values, different colors, and see what is working. And what isn't working, you get rid of and you change, and that's really how a painting is done. Now I apply my adjusted blue color over the area where I need it to be. Clouds have so many soft edges, so I will be making a lot of soft edges in this painting, just like I'm doing right now. I'm creating a soft edge between that shadow part of the cloud and the blue sky, and I'm just using that flat part of my palette knife to do it. Now I work on finishing up the bottom part of the sky on that left side of my painting by applying a lighter blue at the bottom portion of my painting. Now most of the time, the lower part of the sky, the bottom part of the sky is going to be lighter in value than the top part of the sky, and that's because the lower part of the sky is further away from you than the top part of the sky. So the top part of the sky is what is actually closer to you, so it is darker. And this is of course why I'm painting the bottom part of my sky slightly lighter in value. I'm painting the rest of the sky on the lower right side of the painting here. Then I scrape away part of that shadow part of the cloud to make way for me then mixing up a much lighter whitish color that will be more of that light white area of the cloud. I also use my thumb to soften up more edges on that part of the cloud where the shadow is meeting the sky. On my palette, I mix up a very light value color and apply that now for that top area of the cloud. To get this very light value color, I took, of course, a lot of white, and then I mixed in a small amount of blue and also a small amount of orange. Again, just very small amounts, but enough to make it slightly darker. You don't want to use white that's straight from the tube because it is far too light and bright, and you want to be able to save that for when you really need a bright highlight area. Since soft edges are really important when painting clouds, I continue to create soft edges throughout the process of my painting, just like I'm doing here, creating that soft edge between the light area of the cloud and the shadow area. Now I bring in my palette knife to make the edges even softer. Now on my palette, I created an even lighter white by mixing some just white from the tube to my already mixed up white that I applied earlier to my painting. This lighter white is of course for the top upper part of the cloud, and again I'm using my palette knife to soften the edges. Now I return my attention back to that bottom shadow area of the cloud. I mix up a slightly darker color by reusing that shadow color that I mixed up earlier and just mixing in a little bit more blue and then also some more orange to the color. I also mixed in a very small amount of yellow to the color as well, just to make it less purpley. And of course, I continue to soften the edges using my palette knife and also my fingers. Now I continue to extend that bottom shadow part of the cloud out more to the left part of my painting. And now return to the top part of the cloud where I apply more of my very light white color. Now, even though this white is very light in value and it's much lighter than the other white that I mixed up in the very beginning, it still isn't the white that comes straight out of the tube. You really don't want to use that unless you need a really light highlight at the very end. I still mixed it with a little bit of blue and also a little bit of orange as well. Now, as you work on a painting, you're constantly moving around to different parts of the painting. And of course, here now, I'm moving to the top part of the painting where it's a darker blue color. The first color that I mixed up, the first blue color, was a little bit too gray, so I scraped that away. And here I'm mixing up a more of a real deep bluish color. To get this color, I mixed ultramarine blue, of course, with a little bit of orange, and then I mixed in a very small amount of cobalt blue as well, and I limited the number of I should say, amount of white that I mixed with it. So I just mixed in less white than I did the color that's below that bottom part of the sky. Now I continue to apply this deep blue color around the edge of the cloud. I'm carefully bringing around the contour of that, and I apply it to the rest of that sky area. Now the top part of the cloud forms a much sharper edge than the other edges that I've been making so far, and that's because the contrast is greater. We have a very light value meeting a dark value at the top that's right next to it. So whenever two really high contrast values are meeting right next to each other, it creates a much sharper edge. But of course, I still continue to develop those soft edges in other parts of the painting. And I soften up that top edge where the upper part of the cloud is meeting the dark sky just a little bit. I'm still, of course, need to keep it as a sharper edge than the other parts of the cloud, but I just soften it up slightly so that it fits in better. Now on my palette, I have a slightly darker grayish color that I now apply to that bottom shadow part of the cloud. It just needs to be a little darker than I had it before. Very often when softening edges on a painting, a color can often become lighter in value because it's mixing in a little bit with the lighter colors that are around it, and that's exactly what happened to the bottom part of the cloud, that shadow area. So that's why I'm returning back to it and just making it a little bit darker. But of course, I still continue to deal with the edges throughout the process of my painting, just as I'm doing now. I'm not yet satisfied with the value that that shadow part of the cloud is, so I make it even darker here, just slightly darker. I mix in a little bit more blue and a little bit more orange to my color, and I apply that now to the bottom part of the cloud. After the color is applied, I then take out my palette knife like usual, and I soften the edges in the areas that need to be softened. I now mix up a lighter grayish shadowy color that kind of acts as a transition between that darker shadow color and then the white part of the cloud. Now to get this lighter transition shadow color, I just mixed in some white with my darker shadow color. Now the temperature of my slightly lighter shadow color here is a little bit too blue. So I actually mix in a little bit of orange and a little bit of yellow to make it warmer. If you look at some clouds, you'll notice how some of them have very orange, yellowy colored shadow areas. On my palette, I mix up a much warmer shadow color for that lower left part of the cloud. To make it warmer, I used pretty much the same color that I used for the previous dark shadow color, and I just mixed in a little bit more orange to it. But it's also a little bit lighter than that darker shadow color, so I also have a little bit more white in it. In addition to mixing some orange in it, I also mixed in a little bit of cadmium red to help make it warmer in temperature. Now I use my palette knife to flatten out the color so that I can see it more clearly. Very often the light reflects off of the paint and then you can't really see the real color that it really is. I create a soft edge here between that darker bottom part of the cloud and then that slightly lighter shadow area, and that creates a more smooth transition between the two areas. I now apply more lighter value white paint to the left upper part of the cloud. And right after I apply it, I soften the edge between the really light area and the slightly darker area that's below it. Now I try to make more of a warmer white for this top left upper part of the cloud here. I do that by mixing in a very small amount of orange as well as yellow into the color. I also work on mixing up a warmer shadow color for the area that's below the white part of the cloud. So I do that by taking the shadow color I was using earlier, but mixing in some more orange into it as well as a little bit of yellow. Working with color temperature when you're creating clouds will add a whole nother layer of interest to your painting. So it's really important to pay attention to that and mix those colors. Now, since I wasn't completely pleased with the previous color, I scraped it off and I decided that it needed to be slightly lighter, and so I just mixed in a small amount of white to it and I reapplied that to that area. And then, of course, I softened the edges with my palette knife. Now I work on this sky part of the painting, that area that is right beneath the cloud on the left side. I make this bluish color darker than the blue that's on the bottom part of the painting, but lighter than the blue that's at the top part of the painting. And the reason for this, of course, is because the sky is getting gradually darker as you move from the bottom part of the sky to the top part of the sky. After applying that new blue color, I work on softening the edges between the different areas with my palette knife. I scrape out a small bit of that blue sky at the top part of the painting because I'm going to have the cloud be there and create more of a shape there for the cloud. On my palette, I mix up a darker blue color that will be for the very top part of the painting. And this, of course, will be the darkest blue part of the painting because it's at the top. To get this color, simply mix some ultramarine blue with a little bit of cobalt blue, then I mix in a small amount of orange and a little bit of white. However, I decided that the previous blue color I made was just a little bit too muted, it had too much orange in it, so I scraped it out and I mixed in more blue into my color. I scraped out the color again as it was just a little bit too dark that time, so I lightened it by adding a small amount of white to my blue color. Now that the blue color works well, I apply it to the rest of that upper left part of the cloud painting. I also apply the color to that upper right part of the painting as well. Since there's so many soft edges in this painting and this cloud painting, it's important to also make sure that you create some strong sharp edges. And that top part of the cloud really provides that opportunity. So here I'm making sure that I create a strong contour between that area. I try to create a little bit of variation in that top part of the cloud by kind of breaking up the line there and making areas kind of move in to the cloud. Once again, I return to the shadow part of the cloud that's at the bottom part of the cloud, and I mix up a darker shadow color and I apply it to that area to just make it stronger and stand out more. Like always, I continue to pay attention to edges and I soften areas with my finger or palette knife that need to be softened. I now mix up a very light value white by taking that very light value white that I mixed up earlier and mixing in more white to it to make it even brighter and lighter in value. And I apply this very light value white to the very top part of the cloud. This really makes it stand out more and really shows that that's the area where the sun is hitting the cloud the most. It's also really important to pay attention to transition areas in clouds. Like right here, I apply a very light gray color that kind of works as a transition area for the darker shadow area than the light part of the cloud. I also work on making this front portion of the cloud just slightly darker in value. However, my palette, I mix in more white to that shadow color that's on the front side, and I create a transition area between the very light part of the cloud and then this slightly darker part of the cloud that's at the front side. Now on my palette, I mix up a slightly darker and warmer shadow color that will be for this lower left part of the cloud. I simply used that same shadow color that I was putting on that area earlier, and I just mixed in more orange and a little bit of yellow into the color, and I apply it to that area. And this really helps for that area to kind of feel a little closer to the viewer. I continue to pay attention to edges every step of the way here, and I soften them using my palette knife and also my fingers. I now focus my attention on painting in the rest of that sky area on the right side of the painting, where I still have some blank canvas showing through. Before continuing on too much further though, I add a little bit more white to that top part of the cloud as I felt that really needed more definition there. Now I just continue to paint in the rest of that area on the right side of the sky. And like I mentioned before, I make sure that I'm gradually making the value lighter as I move down towards the bottom part of the sky. I now turn my attention to the top part of the sky as I really feel that it needs to be darker in value. So I mix up a darker blue color in my palette using ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, a little bit of orange, and also a small amount of white. And I simply make it darker and also a little bit brighter than the color that I had there before. As you're kind of coming to the end of a painting, it's really good to take a step back, look at it, and really kind of think and examine what needs to be different and if an area needs to be darker or lighter, and make those changes before you complete your painting. In my case, of course, this last big change is making this top area darker, which as you can see just really makes it stand out much more, and it creates a higher contrast between that top part of the cloud and the sky, and it just makes that cloud stand out much more to the viewer. I also apply a lighter white again to that same area on the right side of the upper part of the cloud. This also creates a sharper edge and also makes it stand out more. When there's so many soft edges all around the painting, it's good to have some variety and have some hard edges in some areas. Now that wraps up this video tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this. Leave a comment and let me know why you enjoy painting clouds. I would love to hear.